This is a short tutorial on the student-led discussion strategy called Symposium. The goal of Symposium is student-orchestrated learning where the ownership is shifted from the teacher to the student. So what is it in a nutshell? I've been a teacher for a while and I've used a number of different student group strategies such as literature circles, reciprocal teaching, Socratic seminar, fishbowl, Harkness method. And while they're all proven to be very good strategies, there's some, in my opinion, things that become clunky or defeat the student's energy. For example, in lit circles and reciprocal teaching, they have roles and jobs that they do. And I feel that the students become very entrenched in what's my job, and the release of those scaffolded tools and those roles never really reaches full fruition, and the nature of the conversation can be stunted. I'm not saying they're not good things for students to learn in first, second, third grade. I've seen wonderful things with lit circles and reciprocal teaching and fishbowl in the primary grades. But once you're getting students into the intermediate grades and middle and high school, I think they're ready for something that's structured, but the structure is different and the freedom of the discussion is there, and it puts that structural part on the preparation that the kids do before they move into their actual conversations. So I feel like I break up the unit in getting prepped for being able to do Symposium into the weeks of lessons with the prep works, about 2 weeks for that, possibly 3, depending on how long your students have been doing student-led groups in their school experience, depending on if your school or district has a trajectory across grade levels of how you're going to develop small group instruction. If you're jumping in cold and your kids don't have a lot of experience, it's going to take a little bit longer. But the things that they need to know how to do is they have to have the norms set for their groups. So we need a mini lesson on how do you write a norm? What are some examples? Let's walk away with 3, 4, 5 max group norms that we're going to honor and follow. What's accountable talk and talk moves? How do you use sentence stems and structures to craft questions so that when you actively listen, you use a part of what the other person said to agree, disagree, piggyback, or revise what they're saying. So that takes some practice in that. How do you write a great question? We need some mini lessons around question-answer relationship and what are the 4 types of questions, as well as we need to understand how you build text-dependent questions. And then we need to develop our own mini rubrics. So we use some basic rubric understandings, and then we talk about our success criteria for our class's Symposium in that particular unit, and then we build the rubrics around that. So we have some very generic rubrics to start with that we can use to make revisions as we go and grow in the process. And then we practice 2 or 3 simulated symposiums, just so they get the hang of it, and then we record it, they can watch themselves and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to give myself some feedback, and that's not so great. But usually after they've seen themselves interact and they've seen what it looks like when it can work well, then we're ready for the whole. And then we move into the actual prep and the Symposium itself, and then we do a gallery walk and a wrap-up. So we went through this, but I want you to understand that the prep for Symposium starts with whole class activity, but then it moves to the learner because the learner has to equip themselves with some tools. And so hopefully they've come in with some note-taking and graphic organizer experience, so we can generate, we've got a T-chart, we've got a Venn, we've got a Cornell note structure, we've got Post-its, you know how to annotate. If you can say yes to all of those things, it's going to move faster. If not, those are things that need to be practiced. The reason being is before they actually go into their seminar, they will have read and prepared, and they will have talked about what their launch questions are going to be, and then they have time to prepare again based on the launch questions that the group has decided. And then during the team meetings, they need to be able to come to consensus. So those are important preps for symposium. Then we go into the idea of how do you give feedback that's not personal, not evaluative. It's about the success criteria for the symposium and the unit, and it's about what students did and said and how they responded and how they used evidence in the conversation. So if you look at the slide, we want action-oriented feedback. For example, when you listen and restated the content to piggyback onto the ideas of the group, you move the conversation forward. Nowhere in that feedback do you see an opinion or the word I. You're describing what they did. The feedback based on the success criteria and the actions of the participant create the kind of feedback that we're looking for. A typical symposium, the shortest time you need is a 30-minute structure because they need time to get ready. And then they need about 15 or 20 minutes to actually do the symposium. And then they need about 5 minutes to craft their spotlight. And then you need gallery walk time. So you'll have to look at how long your class periods are, and they're very different in different schools, whether you have a block schedule or a traditional schedule. So as you are doing this, you will flex it to work for you, because this is definitely not always one size fits all. The groups I like, no more than 6, and one person serves as an observer. You could have 6 with an observer if you've got a bigger class size. So you're probably going to have 4 or 5 groups going on at the same time. And they're going to be really focusing on their conversation, but the observers are just observing and taking notes and preparing a summary. The guide moves the group along, kind of serving as a leader. They pose launch questions when they feel that the group is ready for them, and they might jump in with some accountable talk to move the group in another direction if things are stagnating. Everyone will have a turn doing these different things at some point. So that's an important thing to realize. After the launch questions have been thoroughly discussed, then they'll go around, they'll share a highlight, and then the observer will summarize, and they'll create what we call a spotlight. So we call those symposium spotlights. And what it is if I've got 4 or 5 groups going on in the classroom, after the discussions have taken place, we then have 4 or 5 of these symposium spotlights to put around the room. And I happen to have whiteboards for that usage, but you can also use chart paper. And then each group moves together to look at the spotlights of the other groups. And they discuss them and they respond to them using sticky notes or writing notes to them on the whiteboard. And then after everybody has visited the other spotlights in the classroom, then you have a closure discussion as a whole group that takes just a few minutes. And that's where the teacher can give the feedback that identifies what the group has successfully done that honors those success criteria on that particular day. I'm proud of the work that my students did in this. Here's an example of a spotlight that I'm particularly proud of. I typed it up from their note. But I want you to listen for the literary devices, the terminology, and the fact that they brought to bear their understanding of the theme while they talked about a book called I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys, and they were talking about how the characters developed. So here's the spotlight. There's a juxtaposition of characterization between Bruno and Christian's mother. They both reacted differently to the secu and the government. Bruno was outspoken, Christian's mom was secretive and worried. These actions and behaviors show who they are. It also points to the theme of resistance and compliance. So you can see these are 9th graders who created this spotlight, and they're really understanding the nature of the assignment. Assessing the symposium from the teacher lens, your students will have participated at some point in being an observer and have notes from that. They've all created the spotlights together as a group summary. They also do individual self-reflection assessments, group assessments. They can do peer assessments as well. And then the teacher goes around during symposium using specific tools to take notes through their observation, and also prompting and coaching where it's needed to keep those conversations going. And then the summative, the teacher can design a final symposium that also can be partnering with exam prep that they get graded on. And then the students will self-reflect and group reflect over that final symposium. And you may also have a unit assessment. So as you can see, you can have formative and summative measures. And this can become an integral part of what you do in your classroom. Students responded really well to this. And so I surveyed the students. I asked them to think about what they really felt they gained from the symposium experience. And here are some of the examples. I'm just going to read you a couple of them. I appreciated the time to read and decide what I thought was important. Students who are introverts need time to think before they're asked to jump into a discussion. So once the group has chosen their questions, the launch questions for the seminar, I give the students time to go back through their notes and look at those 4 or 5 prompts and make sure they're prepared. So the kids appreciate that, but especially the introverts or the people who need to think inside. They're not external processors. So it honors their learning style. Knowing the process before we had to get ready for the discussion gave me more confidence. Because they participated in writing the launch questions, they felt like they owned them and they knew what to look for and they knew how to respond and what to listen for. I learned way more when I create the launch questions and the discussion prompts and ideas. So again, from a teacher's stance, if you start this practice in the beginning of a school year, it might take you the entire first quarter or longer to build the practice in. But once you do, you have shifted the ownership from yourself to the classroom, and you've moved yourself from the teacher and the holder of the knowledge and the person doing direct instruction to the coach and also just to be the guide. And so the students move from being part of a class to being part of a group and also individual learners who own their learning.